My background in teaching was pretty much the same as everybody's background in teaching at the college level, which is none. I didn't have as much as 5 seconds instruction on how you do that. And so I did what most of my colleagues do, which is they go by what their teachers did. And nobody taught their teachers either, and so it goes all the way back for the last 1,000 years or so. I lectured. And it took me about 15 years to figure out that on the teaching side of the fence, things were not going quite the way I had in mind. And what I did was I started wandering around in the literature of cognitive and educational psychology to see if those people could tell me anything about what I was supposed to be doing for a living. And at that point, I started trying things that I read about, seeing if I could get them to work in my engineering classes. Some of them did. And I started writing about some of what I was doing. One thing led to another, and over time my career focus just shifted from the technical side of engineering to education. Today's workshop is intended primarily just to introduce some of these ideas, the things that I learned from the literature that nobody had ever taught me about writing learning objectives and defining what you want students to be able to do after you've taught them, if they've learned what you wanted them to learn. Getting students actively engaged in class rather than just lecturing at them. And primarily to introduce some of these ideas and methods. Active learning very simply means getting students to do things in class that are course related other than watching and listening to the instructor and maybe taking notes. When you're listening to an instructor lecture, your role is mainly passive. You're just receiving information. And if the only thing that's happening is lecturing, the information is coming at you as though out of a fire hose. And the human brain is incapable of absorbing information past a certain point, which means most of the content of the lecture is just lost. Brain can't absorb it, it never gets into long-term memory, and it might as well never have been said in the first place. If, on the other hand, the instructor presents some information, and then the students are given an opportunity to do something with it for brief periods of time, seconds to minutes, to work with it, to try out the method that the instructor was teaching, to think about it, to reflect on it in terms of their own experience, and then maybe to share the ideas with one another in small groups in class. It gives them time to process the important pieces of the lecture, which is what the lecturer hopefully will be focusing on. And now their brains are able to work with that information. There's a much greater chance that the important stuff will be stored in long-term memory, which is to say it's been learned, and everything works better. TAPS, which is T-A-P-P-S, stands for Thinking Aloud Pair Problem Solving. And that's a particularly powerful active learning technique. So an example of how I use it, let's say I'm going over a problem and its solution in class that pulls together everything I've been trying to do for the last month, synthesizes things. TAPS is the technique I use to do it. And the way it works is I have all of the students divide themselves up into pairs. And one of them is A and one of them is B. And then I have them, they have a handout with a problem and a partial solution. Some of the solution is worked out. Some is left blank for the students to fill in, particularly the difficult parts. And then they take turns. To begin with, one of them is the explainer and the other is the questioner. The explainer goes through the problem solution up to a certain point and explains it to his or her partner. The partner, the questioner, asks questions if the explainer says something that isn't crystal clear. And if the explainer is stuck on something and the partner knows how it goes, the partner can give hints to try to get the explainer unstuck. If they're both stuck on something, they raise their hands, I come over and help. I let them go up to a certain point in the problem, then I stop them, and then I call randomly on students to tell me what they did, to explain the solution to me. And when they get to the blank parts, I will write the correct solution up on the board as they give it to me. And two things happen when I do this. Some of the pairs figure it out as far as they needed to go. And if they figure it out, they own it because they did it. If I just do it conventionally in a lecture, and I'm a decent lecturer, it all looks clear, they're nodding their heads, pretending that they understand it, but they really don't, and they don't really know that until they go home and try to do something similar and struggle for 3.5 hours on a problem because they just missed one little point in the solution. It looked clear when I did it, but they just didn't understand it at all. And so when they do it, clearly they know how to do it because they did it. If they get stuck, if they struggle for the 2 minutes or so that I allow them to do it, and they can't get it, now their ears are pointing straight up. They're asking questions if they didn't understand something. And when they leave that class, they're going to know how to do that. And so now when they have to do something similar on a problem, they'll just breeze through it instead of the 3.5 hours that it would take for a conventional lecture. If we started providing some incentives for faculty members to improve their teaching, to participate in workshops and learning communities and training programs, and if we provided meaningful rewards on the order that they're provided for research for an exemplary teaching performance, I think you'd see the teaching rising to a position of much higher priority when faculty members determine where they're going to allocate their time.